that was available. My second shot is scheduled for 3 weeks from last Friday, which is fine. I don't feel either great or terrible. Conceptually, I mean, as far as getting the shot, I barely had any soreness in my shoulder and no other side effect at all. I mean, barely any soreness. And so that was fine. And most of my friends who have gone through the vaccine process, the ones that had any noticeable negative, short term, but just negative side effects from the shot, just feeling bad kind of stuff, those were almost all, or maybe all, from the second shot, not the first shot, which does make sense. We talked with a doctor about it on the show, right? If your body is generating strong amount of antibodies against the virus, then it does make more sense that if you've been vaccinated once, then when you get it again, the second shot, and your body thinks, then there's a virus coming in, and your body is ready this time to fight against it, plus producing more antibodies, then you may have a stronger reaction, for a day or two or whatever of not feeling that great. So we'll see. Part of the reason, actually, that I intentionally scheduled my shots for a Friday was that if they ended up making me feel not very good, I wouldn't miss work because I like talking with you in the morning. So I scheduled mine for Fridays. So anyway, like I said, conceptually, I don't feel great or terrible about it. I just sort of feel like it's a thing I need to do. Generally speaking, I'm a strong supporter of vaccines. I did want to wait long enough with this where I'd have a sense that, well, it's too soon to say we know about the truly long-term side effects, but let's say medium-term side effects, since this vaccine has been in testing and then given to people in the real world for going on, well, more than 6 months now. I feel pretty good that at least in the medium term, if there were significant side effects, we'd know about them. So it's fine. It's fine. And for me, just given what I do for a living, I'll give you one example why I really want to get this vaccine, maybe more than some others might want to, and that is I do like having guests in studio with me, which we're still not allowed to do, and I'm not sure when we will be allowed to do that. So all my guests are by phone, by Zoom, that kind of thing, which is, it's okay, but there are some circumstances, some kinds of conversations that are just much better when the guest and I are looking at each other. And to me, those fall into two particular categories. One is some really intense, personal kind of conversation. For example, there's a guest I want to have on the show who has just been through an unbelievable amount of stuff in his life and has seemed to, come out pretty well on the other side. And it's a kind of conversation I'd rather not have by phone. And then the other thing is, now that Comedy Works is open again, I think they're open at half capacity, so they're selling out real fast every Friday and Saturday, at least on the early shows, which are the ones that I tend to go to. But it's just not really the same having a comedian by phone versus having them in studio. So I think that my getting vaccinated will increase the chances of management allowing me to have guests in studio again. So that's just one thing for me. Anyway, we'll see. I'm not sure I should mention this, but maybe I will, just because it's sort of interesting. I've been having some modest health issues lately that have been impossible for any doctor so far to diagnose. Like little headache, little dizziness, little abdominal stuff. Not stuff that's kept me from work. I think maybe one day I didn't work a couple months ago or whatever, but just, it's sort of low-level stuff. But the reason I mention it is that so far, the only thing that I can come up with that explains it all would be if I had COVID and didn't know it. There are reports of people who have these symptoms after having COVID, symptoms a lot like mine. There's also some reporting that people who have had some of these symptoms start getting better faster after they get the vaccine, even though they don't have the virus anymore. Anyway, it's an odd question for me because on the one hand, these little health issues, again, they don't feel very serious. They just feel a little kind of annoying. They would be best explained if I had COVID before. The thing is, I didn't get a COVID antibody test before getting the vaccine, so now there's no point in getting an antibody test because I will have antibodies because I had the vaccine. But it's an odd thing. And I don't know what the odds are, right? If my symptoms are being caused by the after effects of COVID, then whenever it was that I had COVID, which would have been months ago if the theory is right, then I had no symptoms at all at that time. None. And it would also mean that either I had COVID and didn't give it to anybody in my house, or I had COVID and did give it to 1 or 2 or 3 people in my house, but they were all completely asymptomatic as well. You'd think how much I'm around my wife and kids that if I ever had COVID, that they would have gotten it too. I mean, we sit around the dinner table together and eat dinner, and yet none of them ever had any symptom of COVID. And around, I want to say, Thanksgiving, my wife and one of the kids did get COVID tests, not because they had symptoms, but because they needed to for something, and those tests were negative. So it's just all really, really weird, and I have no idea. I have no idea. But, like I said, I'm a little bit glad that I got my first vaccine shot, and I thought it would be important, not from the sense of trying to beat you over the head like the way, way, way too many ads that we hear from the government on the radio telling you to do this and do that about COVID. I'm not trying to badger anybody like that. I just thought that as we got into this and the conversation about about vaccine became a thing in the public consciousness, I said on this show, and I think I represented a lot of people. I said on the show, conceptually, I'm down with taking the vaccine. I would just like to wait a little longer to make sure that I feel more comfortable about the safety profile. I feel pretty good about the efficacy, right? Its effectiveness against the virus. I already feel pretty good about that. I just wanted a little time. You know, when we were talking in December about people getting vaccinated, December, January, I said on the show, I just want to wait a little while. And I just think to the extent that anybody gives a rat's behind about my opinion, I just thought it would be the right thing to do if I felt like, okay, I've seen enough to feel comfortable enough. I'm not saying I feel 1,000% certain that we know everything about potential long-run side effects. We can't because the vaccine hasn't been around that long. But at this point, with 6+ months of the vaccine being tested on people, I think, without looking to overstate my impact on, the community, I don't think I'm that important. I just thought it would be the right thing for me to do when I got to the point of thinking I've seen enough to actually go get the shot, just so I can kind of follow through with you on what I said I was doing, right? I said I was waiting to feel a little better, not that I ever felt bad, but just a little more confident about the safety of the thing, and I do, so I did. So that's kind of where I am, and they say, with these mRNA vaccines, they say it's something like 80% effective just after the first shot and high 90s after the second shot. So anyway, that's where I am. If you want to share any of your vaccine stories with me, text me at 57739. I will get my text thing going here in the next, actually I'll try to get it going here while I'm talking to you because I hadn't started it up yet this morning, but I'll do that now. so that I can see all of your texts. Please do include the word Ross in your text if you text me at 57739. Oh, a listener asked, Ross, could your symptoms be stress-related? Probably not. And it's a good question, and it's a question that lots of people have asked me. And the reason I say that I think my symptoms are probably not stress-related is that my entire adult life, professionally speaking, has been very stressful, right? I got into financial markets trading when I was 21. I told you I was the youngest trader on the trading floor. I lost all of my money. I lost $100,000 more than all of my money in 1989 when I was 24 years old, and had to figure out how to make a comeback and get back to trading because I knew I was good at it. You know, I did make a mistake that previous day and certainly paid for it in a big way, but I am actually a pretty good trader and made a career of it for many years after that. But my point is, that was way more stressful than anything I'm going through now. And frankly, you know, when I'm sitting here speaking with you in the morning, I'm not in a position of having a bunch of trades on in the market, which was my previous job, where at any given moment I could lose $1,000 or $10,000 or $100,000, right? And I did have a lot of $10,000 losing days, several $50,000 losing days, and one $280,000 losing day when I only had $180,000, which was a lot for a 24-year-old to have in the bank. I was doing pretty well. I lost it all and spent quite a while just wondering how I was going to survive, literally how I was going to pay my rent. And then just going through that world of living in a job where you can lose money every day, living through the death of my brother, living through a lot of things. I'm not saying my life has been very hard, okay? But I'm just saying most of my adult professional life has been more stressful than my life is now. I have the standard worries about my kids that any parent has and all that. But, you know, professionally, at least for today, I think I still have a job. You know, I'm still here talking to you. And I just, frankly, I don't feel that stressed. I don't feel that stressed compared to what the rest of my adult life has been like. And the rest of my adult life has prepared me to manage stress pretty well. I tend not to feel stressed that much. Anyway, enough about me on that. I appreciate the question, and I don't think that my symptoms are coming from stress. And I want to stress to those of you who are worrying about me now, what I'm dealing with on the health stuff, I think, is annoying, but not particularly serious. It's frustrating. But I don't think I'm going to drop dead, and I don't think I'm going to, have some kind of long-term disability or anything like that. It's just an annoyance. So don't worry, it'll be all right. Now, I did actually want to follow up a little bit more on some of this pandemic stuff, but not about me and not about my vaccine. Just a couple of news stories that I saw that are quite interesting, and I'll probably delve into them in some detail over the course of this show and maybe over the course of coming shows as well. Okay, one piece from Axios, the headline is, and this is just from a few hours ago this morning, the warning signs of a longer pandemic. And what's interesting about this story and other stories of its type is that they're discussing the idea that maybe the COVID pandemic will go longer than we've been thinking in the context of vaccine rollout that's been going really well. We were at somewhere between, I think, 3.5 to 4 million people a day getting vaccines at the end of last week. And by the end of this week, we should be at something like 50% of the adult American population having had at least one shot, whether that's at least one shot of the single-shot vaccine or at least one shot of a two-shot vaccine, which already provides some protection. There's some talk about whether any of these variants are a little more resistant to the vaccine. And it appears that the South African one is a little bit better fighter against the vaccine. The vaccine seemed to work well against the British variant. The South African variant is not highly prevalent in the United States, and I think the vaccine is still mostly effective against that. So the question will be, and we may talk about this, actually I might talk about this even in the next segment of the show, who's taking the vaccine and who's not, and why, I think is a really interesting thing. So there's two other quick stories that I'm just talking about these on a high level for now. And we'll get them into more detail, but just kind of want to put all this stuff into one pot to make our big COVID discussion stew for this morning. Headline from the Wall Street Journal from yesterday, actually from last night, might as well have been, from yesterday afternoon. The other reason the labor force is shrunken, fear of COVID-19. And they talk about how, even while things seem to be kind of getting back to normal, there's a fairly large number of Americans, they're talking about maybe 4 million, who actually aren't looking for jobs, not because jobs are hard to find, but because they are still worried about catching COVID. A lot of these people are women who either have children and don't want the risk of exposing their children, or who work with or who live with elderly parents and don't want the risk of exposing their parents. And I don't envy them this conundrum. Everybody's got to make their own decision as to what level of risk you're willing to take. But everybody does need to remember that there is significant risk in making the decision not to work because you're afraid of COVID. And the last thing, and this is probably worth talking about more later as well, a fascinating story from CNBC, headline, Chinese vaccines, quote, don't have very high protection rates, end quote, top Chinese health official admits. What would happen if the most populous country on the planet, or second most, has a vaccine that's only 50% effective?
This is Denver's talk station with Ross Kaminsky now. Tom Martino at 10, 630, KHOW, Denver.